Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, June 2nd, 2025, episode 403, and we're going to talk about perspectives today. And basically, it was something I said at church last night on Sunday night when we were reading scripture. But then I was listening to the news today, some of the podcasts that I normally listen to. I'm fighting a really bad cold. Uh, and so I just heavily medicated myself, and so I'm going to try to quick record this before I fall asleep. But so I was going through my usual uh programming of podcasts. And so there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of problems going on in the world today. But of course, we have to always keep in mind that fundamental to all of it is are the bankers, right? In particular, the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, how they basically give out orders to all of the central banks of all the major countries. So just how much they influence the domestic and foreign policies of major countries in the world, it's interesting, right? Even the United States, Jerome Powell every 2 months goes to Basel, Switzerland, and meets all the other central bankers of the world, and they discuss policy. What exactly they discuss, no one really knows. But everything revolves around money. And if you've been following the news, the flow of gold, the flow of dollars, the US treasuries, all of this stuff, then you know that banking is a very large aspect of our world and society today. Then, of course, there's the military-industrial complex. There was these drone strikes in Russia that took out a couple of bombers over in Siberia. And it was a very complex attack. Even though the drones were pretty cheap and simple, the attack itself was 18 months in the making. You had false roofs of containers. So the drones would take off after the roof would uh, retract automatically, mechanically through remote control. And so then they would attack the bombers. Now, three of the five containers did not actually open, and so the attacks were not as extensive as the propaganda would lead you to believe. In other words, 41 bombers were not destroyed. And even if they were, most nuclear weapons now are delivered through missiles, ICBMs, not through planes. Uh, and then, of course, if you listen to Judge Napolitano's episode with Alastair Crooke, then you know that those planes were out in the open as required by the nuclear arms treaty between Russia and the United States. So, U.S. nuclear weapon carrying capable bombers, the B-52s, they're also out in the open. That way, they can be monitored by satellite, and if they start to move, everyone knows, right? So they're out in the open as a result of treaty. So for them to be attacked is to draw attention or threat to the nuclear arms treaty between Russia and the United States, which is insanity. Why? It's just hard to understand who would be calling the shots and think that this is a great idea to start messing with nuclear capability of another country. It just boggles the mind. And obviously, it was done to sabotage the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. And as it turns out, the meeting today only lasted 1 hour in Istanbul. So, well, George Washington was right. Get away from entangling alliances. But of course, people today, especially in the military industrial complex, this is what they want. They want war. And it gives them the ability to hide all of their financial problems that has happened as a result of central banks here and in many other countries. So who's involved, who pays, who benefits, all of this is just it's just bizarre. I'm not really interested in digging all that deep, too deeply, because I'm not really interested in it. They'll do whatever it is that they do, and there's not a whole lot I can do about it except try to work in my community, and then when everything goes sideways, perhaps lead people or guide people in a proper direction. The markets are going crazy, of course, and Shanghai commodities exchange, gold exchange, is taking over commodities pricing. So it used to be the COMEX or the LBMA in London or the COMEX in Chicago, but now Shanghai has taken over everything. They have even built vaults, gold vaults all over the world to facilitate trade using the Chinese currency and also the gold that China has been accumulating. It's said that America supposedly has 8,000 tons, give or take, of gold at Fort Knox and West Point and some other place. But Shanghai or China, it is rumored, has well over 20,000 tons of gold. Even though they report 2,000 tons, it's more like 20,000. And people have crunched numbers to explain how they got that high. But if that's the case, then of course, it's China who now is going to become the economic powerhouse in spite of all of its domestic economic problems. And I've warned people about this. You do not want Asians running the world. They see the world in a very, very different way. So there are a lot of things to listen to, many different perspectives. And I was thinking about this idea of perspective. I brought it up at church in my explanation of a Bible passage last night. And I thought, hey, let's just turn it into an episode. So I've talked about uh, being in a box and how there are several walls, which I've explained before in other episodes uh, what the walls are. And therefore, once you identify what is keeping you back, then you can come up with a solution on how to move forward. So I thought I would elaborate a little bit more on that, on the one side, which is that a limitation of knowledge. So one side of the box that we put ourselves in, and we put ourselves in a box. It's not that other people put us in a box. We put ourselves in a box. Once we get comfortable at life, we just put ourselves in a box and we try to make sure that nothing changes. Well, one side of that box is the information that we know and believe is true. So I say that one way to get out of the box is to increase our knowledge. Okay, but in what sense and how? It's through perspective, right? So, uh, the way that we increase our knowledge is we change our perspective. So, usually how things go is when you like a topic, there's a certain idea, a certain field of study, then you start digging. And then you find interesting things. And so you want to dig a little bit deeper. Welcome to grad school. And the dissertation is basically the expression of this digging down as deep as you can go, right? Dissertation is a very narrow focus. You're going to take a very narrow topic and you're going to drill down as far as you can go and become the expert on that topic, right? So the way I did it was I wanted to understand race, the dynamics of race. Like, why am I Asian? Why does it even matter, right? So I looked at race theories, and as I explained elsewhere, there are many race theories. I mean, the whole library is full of hundreds of different race theories. And trying to find a good one is like looking for a needle in a haystack because every single one of them sounds legit, right? When they make their case, you read their book and they lay out their explanation. It sounds plausible, but they're all different, right? Their explanation of what race and racism is All they all differ slightly one way or another. And then my dissertation chair suggested I look at a book by an author who used to teach at my university. I guess that's how my dissertation chair was familiar with that particular author. And it turns out that his theory was a theory on theories, right? So each individual book generally would present a theory on race and how it plays out in society. This particular book, what it did was it tried to explain why there were so many different race theories. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting. And so I used that to finally complete my dissertation. But I blew it up with my own spin. In other words, I took it even further. Uh, and so I was really comfortable with my understanding of race. And there were a lot of social dynamics that I could explain pretty easily. But there were other questions, right? So you could explain what people were seeing, but then how do you diffuse all of it? How do you walk it back? How do you correct all of the problems that are created with a certain narrow understanding of race, right? How do we rethink race? And then, of course, there would be other related problems such as greed in society, spirituality. In other words, the race theory was okay to explain some things, but there were so many other things which would always run up and rub up against the racial phenomena that I was trying to explain that I would always fall short. Like I knew I was missing something, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. And then I read Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, and then there it was. But it didn't come from the humanities as such. It didn't come from race theory. It didn't come from history. It came from economics, which I guess, is in the humanities as well. But it's a weird part of humanities, right? It's the part that most people don't really think is part of the humanities. At least I never did. But now that I understand economics, it makes total sense because economics is, well, broadly speaking, the study of the use of limited resources with multiple uses, right? So time, for example, has multiple uses. We can use our time for lots of different things, except it's limited. So now we have to come up with priorities, right? How will I use my time wisely? I've talked about this before. And economics is the study of how we use our time, how we use our resources. What's the best resource to use in this situation, right? Maximizing value, efficiency, etc. And so economics was fantastic for me. It opened up so much more of life and how race dynamics come into play. Like, in other words, race dynamics allowed me to see the whole economic picture in a different way, differently from other economists, right? Not that I'm an economist, but the way the economists that I would read, right? It would put a different spin on what economists were saying. But it also, knowledge of economics helped me even improve my understanding of scripture, which I thought was really, really interesting. And so then it made me realize that we need multiple perspectives. It's not enough to become an expert on race theory, for example, to be able to explain and give counseling to people, right? We need a broad base of information. And even if we can't become dissertation level, PhD level economists or historians or scientists, we can listen to people who have done that. We have access to that information, and we can use the dumbed down versions of the things that they say to apply in our own lives. And see, this is what I think is the problem of so many smart people. I think I've mentioned this in the episode of comedians, but I'm in such a medicated haze right now. I'm just going to keep plowing along. And if I repeat myself, I repeat myself. But the problem of a lot of smart people, quote unquote smart people, people who have PhDs, is that they believe that their narrowly focused doctoral work is enough to be universal in relevance and application. In other words, let's say, for example, I'm a cosmologist. Call me Niels Tyson deGrasse, right? So I study the stars. That means I'm so smart that I can make intelligent comments about race dynamics, right? Or about the efficacy, the effectiveness of vaccines, right? No, it doesn't. It does not translate like that, right? Yes, it does signal that you are at least determined, right? Because to get a PhD legitimately, not through a degree mill, is it takes a long time, and so you need perseverance, right? I think a lot of people can do it. It's just that a lot of people don't have the perseverance or the time and money to be able to finish a dissertation. In other words, you're going to be poor in the whole process, unless right, in the humanities anyway. And not a lot of people can tolerate that level of poverty, right? Right. I always tell people that's a reason why no one wanted to marry me. Who wants to marry a poor dude? You know, that's not a very good uh attractive point for people. But anyway, but a lot of people believe though that their field of study gives them universal knowledge. Oh, now that I know this piece of literature this well, better than anyone else, I can use that same understanding of this piece of literature to understand human dynamics. Right? You might think that people don't actually do that, but yeah, actually they do. Even Niels Tyson deGrasse, I've talked about him before on this podcast. When he wanders off his field, right, of cosmology, he sounds like an idiot, right? He's a moron. And I think that's his problem, that he sees the world through his cosmology, which might be okay for some people, but I think it falls short in a lot of other topics. Um, so a lot of people just basically interpret all of the world through their narrow perspective. And I've seen this a lot with the people I used to teach with in the university, right? It might make sense to the person who's speaking, right? Oh, that's your subjectivity because that's the way they see the world. It makes sense to them. But to other people, it probably does not make as much sense. So if you look at the world through philosophy or through theology, the study of God, right? So I would even have conversations with my dad. My dad was a philosophy PhD. I mean, he was a monster when it came to philosophy. I mean, he studied it all. I have memories of his conversations with other philosophy professors and teachers, and he would always kind of have an edge on them. Philosophy students would come and have discussions with him, but he didn't understand economics. And so once I started digging into economics, I started presenting different interpretations, even of scripture. And even he was a little bit impressed, I have to say, towards the end there. But anyway, so that's my point. We can be experts in something that the world considers deep and profound, but it does not necessarily give you information or wisdom in other parts of human life, right? And human life is huge. I like to say uh, that basically the university, because life is so huge, the university divides it up into subjective perspectives. Each department, right, whether psychology to history to applied sciences, whatever, they are all studying the same thing, except from different perspectives. And so, if we really want to get a deeper understanding, whether it's a verse in scripture or a phenomena in life or a current event, the deeper you want if you want your understanding to be deeper, you want to look at that event with multiple perspectives. And I'm not talking about, oh, the Russian historical perspective versus the American historical perspective. No, no. I'm talking about looking at it theologically, philosophically, economically, politically, all of these different aspects, and you'll be able to see much, much more, right? So, how do you break out of your box? Introduce a different perspective, right? So you could be, and the worst at doing this, right? The people who pretend they're getting out of their box, but really what they're doing is they're making their walls stronger to keep them in the box, are Marxists, right? Because they see the whole world as a relationship between oppressor and oppressed, which is even a lie. And I've explained that in my Marx episodes, right? Because they never talk about the Marxist, right? The communist, the true communist, right? So there's oppressor, oppressed, bourgeoisie, proletariat, but they sneak in a third class, which most people seem to miss, and that's the class of communist, which is the government, right? So most people who are living the everyday, they're going by the perspective of oppressor, oppressed, but they never get anything right because they always leave out the communist. And so, how do you break out of it? You introduce a different perspective. Stop thinking like a Marxist and use a different perspective. So, a better perspective, of course, would be freedom. Generally speaking, freedom, not in terms of, oh, uh, what is the perspective of freedom? I mean, you could do that, but the freedom to allow people to live life in the way that they see it, using the knowledge that they have. And if they feel the need to grow, to have more knowledge and information because they have problems in their life, then that's what they should do. It should never be prescriptive. We should never force people, unless, of course, they're our responsibility or our charge, like we're their guardian, like we're their parent, right? Or someone does ask us for advice. Unless that's the case, then people should be free to experiment, to explore, because sometimes a person will come up with an idea which is far better than what everyone else is thinking and resolves so many other problems, right? And that would be the innovator, that would be the entrepreneur. And so this idea of having multiple perspectives, being able to attack a certain situation or observe and analyze the situation with multiple perspectives allows us to get out of the knowledge side of the box. In other words, how do we get more information? Get a PhD or listen to lots of different PhDs from all across the university, and you'll come up with something that is an amalgam of all of those ideas, perhaps something unique to yourself, but certainly not confined to any one single perspective. Anyway, that was a passing thought I had. Thought I'd turn it into an episode and a little food for thought, perhaps, especially since the world is getting so crazy and there are so many different ways of looking at it, right? So the drone attack by Ukraine on air bases in Siberia, right? So, how do we look at that? How do we understand it? How does it affect us? So many different perspectives, right? And so, the more perspectives that we can bring to bear, the more voices that we can listen to, I think the better understanding that we may be able to reach, which helps us to be able to plan out our moves, our personal moves, what we need to do in case something really terrible happens. But that's it for this episode. I am going to go to bed. I'll talk to you next time.